All right. Well, we are. I don't know how to start this.
Well, I'm Michelle,
I'm Sierra.
and we're with Wiggle 100 and the True Oldies WTZN.
Yeah,
And we're pretty
and we have started this little venture into podcasting. I know Mike and Ike have done their show. They've done one episode, and everyone seemed to really like it. So if you haven't watched it, you should go out and watch it. It's really, really interesting. I learned that Ike's brother and sister-in-law are the background vocals to the Monster Mash.
Really?
Yeah.
Didn't you just tell me something else about him the other day about how he was like a part of...
He's best friends with the Temptations and the Supremes.
Yes, that's what it was.
And you have to go listen to their podcast because Ike has lived like 1,000 lives and knows so much about the music industry and all that.
So what was the subject of their first one there?
They were just kind of introducing themselves and their background with music and all of that. So
We can tell I haven't checked it out yet, but it did just come out like 2 days ago.
yeah, but it was really, really interesting. I'm excited for more of those episodes. But we are going to start our own podcast here called Spooky History. At least that's what it's called right now until we can find a better name.
It might be workshopped, or maybe it'll just be Spooky History. We'll see.
And the idea behind this was, well, it's October. It's spooky season. And I wanted to go into Pennsylvania's spooky history or local spooky history and just tell people about it.
Yeah, and we talked earlier about a couple like upcoming subjects that we could do that are very local.
Yeah.
Which I'm pretty excited about. This one isn't quite so local, but I think it's a good diving in point.
Yeah.
Because it's a familiar subject, I think.
Yeah, so if you are from Pennsylvania or you know anything about Pennsylvania, you might have heard of Eastern State Penitentiary.
Which we just talked about. The anniversary of its opening day is coming up here on the 25th.
Yeah.
So
it originally opened on October 25th of 1829. But we're going to go into a little bit of the history, and of course we'll talk about all the spooky things that go on there now.
Yeah, still, there was quite a lot of evidence, it seems like, out there talking about current walkthroughs and the people that were staying there having experiences even back then. So
yeah. So it was built in Philly and was the world's first true penitentiary. Nothing like this had ever happened before.
Hopefully never again.
Hopefully never again, because this was awful. It was... The true inspiration behind this was to inspire true regret into the hearts of prisoners.
Which I was also, the architecture of it, they built it on a hill so that it would look imposing to people down below.
Yeah.
Just like, you don't want to end up here. Like, look it up here and look at where these people ended up. You don't want to end up here. So
yeah. But also with the architecture, it was the first building to have central heat and running water. It had that before the White House had it.
I like how they started there with like a good thing and then just went downhill real quickly.
So before it was Eastern State Penitentiary, it was just a small little jail on Walnut Street in Philly. It started in 1776. And they wanted to expand it because of overcrowding and scandalous conditions.
Which is, we'll find out later in this episode, kind of ironic.
Yeah, because it's not good at Eastern State.
No, well, and it was initially decided that there was going to be enough space for 250 prisoners there.
Mm-hmm.
And then we find out later that that's not.
Yeah, like they had like 1,700 living there.
Within like not that many years of it opening. Like within like what, 20, 30 years of it opening?
Yeah.
1,700 prisoners there.
So in 1787, Dr. Benjamin created the first prison reform group called the Philadelphia Society for Alleviating the Miseries of Public Prisons.
That is a mouthful.
Yeah. And Benjamin Franklin joined this group, and this group is still running today.
I think if we look more into the history of Benjamin Franklin, we'll find all sorts of fun things like that where he might show up in some unsavory places.
Oh, yeah. Benjamin Franklin is not the man that we were told he was in school.
No, him and his ponytail got into some trouble there.
Yeah, they're not good. Oh, let's see here. A few years later, in 1790, 16 cells were added to the Walnut Street jail as part of the Penitentiary House experiment. So this is where we're starting to get into the penitentiary side of it.
I really like how they use the word experiment there.
Yeah.
That definitely, that captures the vibe, I feel like, of what they were talking about initially.
You know how we know now if you lock yourself in a dark room for a long period of time and you're just by yourself, that's not good for your brain?
Yeah, I feel that in my house that has windows. So
Yeah. This is how we know that that's not good for your brain.
I bet you the studies on this are actually probably really interesting to look into as well.
Yeah. So permission was granted to build the Eastern State Penitentiary in 1821, and in 1829, legislation stating separate or solitary confinement at labor is passed due to the belief that crime happened because of the environment that people were in. And if they thought if they separated them into solitude, it would make the criminals regretful of their crimes.
I feel like, judging by the one person that we talked about earlier that was put in this penitentiary and then escaped, which we'll talk about escapes later, but escaped and then committed that same crime and then came back. I don't think that maybe his environment was the thing.
Yeah, I don't think it was the environment.
Not to say that doesn't influence a lot of it, but I think if you put someone, like you said, in a dark room for a long time, I don't know, maybe the thoughts that were there just are amplified because you're the only person you have to talk to.
Yeah. So officially, the first prisoner of Eastern State Penitentiary arrived in 1829, and this is, quote, Charles Williams, prisoner number 1, burglar, light black skin, 7 feet, 5 feet 7 inches tall, foot 11 inches, scar on nose, scar on thigh, broad mouth, black eyes, farmer by trade, can read, theft including one $20 watch, which is about $680 today, one $3 gold seal, which is about $102 today, a gold key, and was sentenced to 2 years confinement with labor.
So who decided that this is where they go? Is this...
Yeah, I don't know.
Because somebody has to be the first experimental person to go into this new penitentiary, right? So
yeah,
what about his particular crime?
Yeah, because it was just theft.
Yeah.
It wasn't like a lot of these prisoners, especially in the beginning, was really petty crimes. It was theft and just little things like that. Later on, you get into the murderers and stuff like that.
Yes.
And
the pig thief that we were talking about, which I'm really stuck on.
But like a lot of it was just theft like that. And to be confined into a dark room just by yourself for hours on end, for weeks on end, years, 2 years.
Which, so you actually haven't even talked about yet what these rooms were like. You've mentioned a couple times that, you know, these people were confined to these dark spaces, but the architecture of this and the designs of the rooms themselves.
Yeah.
You want to talk about that?
They were very small. They only were built to house one person and not very comfortably. So they sat in their cells for 23 hours per day. They were only let out for 1 hour and they could go outside to the like workout place outside. But even that was designed to be in solitary and for them to be alone. They had limited interactions with guards. If they were taken out of their cell, hoods were put over their heads to avoid communication and avoid them learning the layout of the prison.
Like literal burlap hoods, which is crazy. That's and this was, so that was all decided as this penitentiary was going up, that this is how it was going to happen, that they were going to be in solitary confinement for 23 hours a day, that they were going to have these hoods. This is when things were good.
Yeah, this is the
original
good
idea.
This is the good part of the prison. I don't know how else. Like, it just gets worse and worse from here.
Like, this is They initially were talking about this was going to be good. This is going to be like a form of rehabilitation for these people. And they thought that the way that they were going to run this prison was going to change their lives and they were going to come out of here different people. And their initial idea was to confine them
Yeah,
and deprive them of human
because
interaction.
again, it goes back to the idea of crime happens because of your environment.
Right.
So if you were surrounded by nothing but your own thoughts, you would regret your crimes, right? No, you just go insane. So the prison had started housing prisoners, but construction wasn't officially done until 1836. So it opened and started taking prisoners in 1829. Officially, construction was done in 1836. And there's a few famous names that we're going to come across in the history of this place. In 1842, Charles Dickens visited and he wrote about his experience of the prison. And he said, the system is rigid, strict, and hopeless solitary confinement, and I believe it in its effects to be cruel and wrong.
He did not have a good time on his visit.
No.
There's a lot of detailed stuff out there about his visit and how like haunted he was by the whole experience.
Yeah, so even in 1842, they can tell like this is not going to work.
Yeah.
This is horribly wrong to be treating these people that way.
Which, if you've ever read like a Charles Dickens book, he's pretty serious. So if he thought it was rigid.
Yeah. And like I said, we're going to come across a lot of famous names. One of the famous people that this prison housed was Al Capone. He was there in 1929 to 1930. And there was a lot of escapes that went on as well. Over 100 people had escaped from Eastern State Penitentiary, and 4 of those 100 people were never caught. So, I mean, 96 people being caught, but there's still 4 that never were.
I mean, that's just to say too that like that they really escaped. Like just because they're not in their prison cells doesn't mean they're not in the prison.
Right.
With all the like labyrinthian sort of ways in the prison, and we'll find out later like underneath the prison, maybe they didn't escape so much.
Yeah.
Although that setup that Al Capone had was
much nicer than anything anyone else had in that prison. He had
paintings. Like a New York City apartment.
Yeah, pretty much. He had paintings, he had chairs, he had a radio, which no one was allowed contact with the outside world. You couldn't see your family, you couldn't write letters to people, you couldn't have a radio.
Unless you're a notorious gangster, apparently.
Yeah, apparently. Unless you had the money.
Yeah. He was only in there for, what, a concealed weapon?
Yeah.
And they put him in there for 8 months.
Yeah.
But they gave him a radio, so.
He was fine.
I would love to see what the paintings look like.
There was also countless riots in this prison because of the overcrowding, the poor living conditions, the low wages.
And nobody's talked to each other because they were meant to be silent.
Yeah.
They weren't supposed to like hum or whistle or anything.
Yeah, you couldn't like say anything.
So I imagine that probably leads to some tension.
Yeah. And it wasn't until January of 1970 that Eastern State Penitentiary finally closed their doors for good. Which is so late, in my opinion.
Yeah, I was going to say, that's an awful long time. I was looking back to see, like, what year that you had said that it had opened.
Yeah, 1829 to 1970. That's
way too long.
Yeah.
Way too long.
I can't imagine the horrors that went over 100 years in that building.
Especially, like we said, when the initial idea wasn't maybe the best.
Yeah.
And then, as we'll see, it gets worse. For that to go on for over 100 years is just insane.
Yeah. So this is spooky history. We have to talk about why this place is spooky.
Yeah.
So the known paranormal activity that goes on, you've got shadow figures, apparitions, negative feelings, voices, and so much more. So we're going to go into a little bit of detail of that. Shadow figures and apparitions are seen in the cell blocks. There was one figure shown standing completely still. This figure is known for this. He stands completely still at the end of a long hallway and doesn't move until you try to approach it. and then at that point it takes off and runs and disappears.
So I had a thought when I was reading this. As we talked about, like when they had to go out, when the prisoners had to go out into the hallways and they had hoods on, and they didn't really know the layout of the place, and they had, you know, sensory deprivation for most of their stay, that maybe this one stands there because like he doesn't see you approaching, and it once you like
Maybe.
get closer, he like senses it, because he wouldn't be able to see
Yeah.
other people like in the hallway when he was still living.
Yeah, because I mean, these people were plunged into darkness for 23 hours a day,
Yeah.
and that messes with your sight anyway.
Yeah.
I
There
never
was
thought of that.
a layout. Okay. So part of the layout too, I don't know if you initially talked about like the sort of like wagon wheel layout, but then every other cell block, once they started building on it, was underneath the second story. So on the first story, they all had skylights, but then when they built the second story on every other one, then only the second story had the skylights. So the light only came in from the first or the top prisoner's sunlight. That was what you got.
Yeah.
So it's like further down, the more deprived
Yeah, the more
of
deprived
stuff
of
you
light.
are. So
And so there's a bunch of different cell blocks there. And in cell block 4, you get negative feelings. One of the most well known encounters happened in the early 1990s. There was a maintenance worker in cell block 4, and he was suddenly hit with negative feelings. And from this, he started to see tormented souls appear on the wall, as well as an apparition leaping across the cell block.
the visuals of that sound terrifying.
Yeah, I can't imagine, like, you're just at work and then all of a sudden you're not feeling the best, you have all these negative feelings, and then you see what you can only describe as tormented souls.
Which, okay, so if that happened in the 1990s and they closed us down in 1970,
Yeah, we've got
what are they paying this man?
Yeah, we've got a 20-year gap.
For sure. I mean, obviously the place needs to be maintained. They still do like tours and stuff. We had seen videos.
You can go to Philly and you can tour Eastern State Penitentiary. I don't Do they do ghost tours or do they just do general tours?
That I do not know. We could pull up the website and see.
Yeah. I'm not sure.
That Cell Block 4 too, that was the one that we were talking about earlier. Cell Block 4 is where they put people in like further isolation. That was one of the ones that was like most deprived of light because it was underneath the second. So like I said, like on the wheel spoke, every other one was underneath the thing. So Cell Block 4 specifically was used as like a punishment block first before they built the other punishment blocks.
And that kind of explains the negative feelings.
For sure, yeah. I can imagine tormented souls when you're already confined, like we've talked about, like when you're already confined and then they further deprive you of like light. They would like cut off to like there's only the door that they would put food in and stuff. They would cut that off sometimes.
Oh my god.
So it would get to the point, there was radiators on the side. It would get to the point where it was like you would feel like you were cooking inside of here.
Oh god.
Or that you were running out of oxygen. And Cell Block 4 was one of the like first experiments that they started kind of doing that stuff.
Yeah.
Not
like
ideal.
we said, not good things happened here, and we're gonna get into way worse things in just a little bit.
Yeah,
here.
like we're still kind of touching the surface of like when it was. I mean, except for in 1990. I would like to know what they paid the maintenance worker.
Yeah, I would like to know, one, why was he there, and how much did you pay him, because that is insane.
Tormented souls.
So then we move on to Cell Block 12. Now, Cell Block 12 is known for voices and a loud cackling laughter, which if I heard that and no one else was around, I'm gone. I'm out of there.
Yeah, nope, that's not. I'm
loud
not interested.
cackling laughter? No, thank you.
Which, if they weren't allowed to talk and they weren't allowed to hum and they weren't allowed to, you know, I imagine that it would echo like that if somebody were to make a noise, if somebody were to laugh, if somebody were to, which you're going insane at that point. So I imagine that's a very haunted sound.
Yeah, and they say the voices are so loud, they echo throughout the prison. So not just Cell Block 12. throughout the whole place. And this place is huge.
Yes.
Like,
Yeah, when we were looking at the pictures of it, like I said, I didn't expect for it to look like that.
yeah.
It is horrifying to look at.
Yeah. Well, let's move on to a little lighter story. There is a ghost dog that lives in Eastern State Penitentiary, and I love this story. So I'm going to tell you about this ghost dog. His name is Pep, and he was actually an inmate at this prison. And Pep, unfortunately, was sentenced to life without parole in 1924 because Pep here, he killed the governor's cat. But really, this is just the story people tell. No one can confirm if that is true or not.
Now, did he have to be confined in solitary before he went on to his further duties?
I don't know. Yeah, this is just the story people have told for over 100 years. But really, Pep was a therapy dog, which surprises me that they would have a therapy dog in this place, especially in the 1920s.
Yeah, well, if you're going to be trying to rehabilitate people, let's give them like a little bit of sparkle there.
Yeah, I guess.
A little silver lining. Pep was probably the only real interaction that a lot of them had for a while.
Yeah, but even though Pep was a therapy dog, he was given an inmate number and a mugshot. So that's how the story came to be, that he was actually sentenced to life without parole. But if you head over to Eastern State Penitentiary today, Pep is known, you can hear his dog tags jingling, or you can hear him howling.
Now, do you think that he knew that he was like in prison, or like he just had a lot of friends?
Maybe he just had a lot of friends, because that's the more fun way to look at it.
I'm gonna look at it that way.
Yeah.
I'm gonna choose to look at it that way.
Yeah.
I'm gonna also tell everybody that the cat story, so that we can keep that story going for another 100 years.
Yes. That is so fun, because can you imagine what, I mean, I have 3 dogs. You have dogs. If one of them killed a cat, oh no, it's the governor's cat. Now your dog has to go to jail.
You better send me to jail too.
Yeah, you're not taking my dog to jail.
No, not for sure not.
No.
I'll be like, I will like Katniss that. Where I'm like,
Oh my god,
take me instead.
Yeah.
I'll go.
I volunteer as tribute.
Yeah.
Other known things are dark figures in the guard's tower. And of course, I mentioned Al Capone stayed here. He, like you said, he only stayed here for 8 months. He did not die here. He was let out. But while he was in Eastern State Penitentiary, people would hear him screaming and begging for James to leave him alone. And it is believed that this James is James Clark, who was a victim of the St. Valentine's Day Massacre, which, of course, we know Al Capone had a hand in. And even after Al Capone left, inmates that were in that cell, and I'm sure it wasn't as nice as it was when Al was there, inmates that were in that cell would hear Al Capone begging for James to leave him alone.
So I have a theory about this too. So like I said, when we were looking into that earlier, I don't believe Al Capone didn't die there. He only spent 8 months of his life there. I'm sure he was a traveling man. He probably is not hanging around this penitentiary, but we know what they say about, Appalachia, and sometimes you hear things that sound like someone else.
Oh my god, I have a story about a mimic. Do you want me to share it with you now? Because it is quite scary.
I'm going to get all goosebumpy. They really freak me out. I won't say the S word, like,
It still freaks me out to think about. So when I was at home still, it was just my mom and I at the house. My brother was like at a friend's house. My dad was staying with my grandparents. And it's like 4 a.m. or something like that. I'm fast asleep in my room. And all of a sudden, my mom comes running into my room. Like, she busts the door open. And she's like, Sierra, are you okay? And I was like, what is your problem? Like, I am fast asleep in here.
I am clearly sleeping.
I'm like, I am asleep. What is your problem? And she said that she was woken up by me screaming for help.
Oh.
She heard me screaming, help, help, mommy, help me, help me. And even like it woke her up, and even after she
Told you.
woke up and she was like awake, she could hear me screaming, and that's why she came running into my room. And like once she hit my door, that's when it stopped, and she opened the door, and that's when she was like, "Oh my god, what just happened?" Because she saw me fast asleep. Like it wasn't me.
Told you I was gonna get like chills from it.
Yeah, maybe we'll do an episode where we talk about like our own ghost experiences,
Oh,
because
man.
like I am a full believer. You're a full believer in all of this stuff. Yeah, maybe we'll do an episode about that, because
That just exchanging stories.
I have quite a few.
Yeah, I would describe myself as a skeptic, but then stuff just keeps happening.
Yeah, stuff that you can't explain. Like I always try to explain it, but then like it's like, what was that my mom heard?
I don't know. And the fact that it stopped when she hit your door.
Right?
Because they tell you not to respond to it. So she knew to come to you, and then stopping like once she actually reached you gives me the heebie-jeebies.
Yeah,
It like freaks me out.
I don't know how to explain that. And like there was like around that time, it was like a month or two that we had just had weird things going on.
Mm-mm.
And we did have a couple like losses in the family, so we were just like, oh, it's just them. They're just playing tricks, because that was the only way we could feel somewhat okay with it.
Now, also, I feel like when there's like a lot of negative like feelings and negative energy, especially like you were talking about, you had a lot of losses at that point. There's like a lot of negative energy in a place like this place that we're talking about now. It's gonna come out in weird ways.
Yeah, also my parents had gone to Gettysburg, and I'm pretty sure they brought something back with them, because that's around the time when they got back that things started to get weird.
Yeah.
Weirder than usual, I would say.
Weirder than usual. Yeah, that might also have something to do with it.
Yeah. And like we had gone back to Gettysburg like a year later, because I wanted to go. They went without me, which I thought was rude.
That is rude. Tell her about herself on the podcast.
Yeah, and we were talking with one of the ghost tour guides, and my mom mentioned that she thought that they had brought something back, and he goes, "Well, how long did it last?" And she goes, that stuff probably like a week or two." And he goes, "Yeah, that's usually they'll follow you for like a week or two, and then they'll come back. They'll come back to
They just got a little lost on
Yeah.
their own.
They're just like, oh, well, these people aren't that interesting. I'll go back."
It's like their vacation. They book their vacation and take off with like a tourist once a year. They're like, yeah, I got mine booked for August, and then anybody that shows up in August just gets haunted for a little while.
Yeah.
That's sorry, guys.
We kind of went on a little tangent there, but
A little bit.
that's fine. So we were talking about Al Capone, and people that lived in that cell could still hear Al Capone begging for James to leave him alone, which I think is strange, because I'm assuming at this point Al Capone hadn't died yet.
No, for sure.
So you're hearing a man that is still living.
Unless they're still hearing him now, but
Yeah. I don't know. Could you imagine Al Capone? It's a residual haunting where he just living that fear of James haunting him over and over again?
If you're in a place like that, like we're talking about, where like you're going crazy, definitely a part of you is going to get left behind. I feel like like whoever you were when you came into this penitentiary is not who you're leaving.
Yeah.
You're definitely leaving some part of yourself behind. So maybe that also explains what they're hearing.
Yeah. So tourists and ghost investigators and stuff like that, they claim to have encounters with James in that cell to this day.
Which they had beef outside of the prison and then ended up here together, right? They didn't come in at the same time, but they had James and Al Capone.
Well, James was killed in the Valentine's Day massacre.
Yeah. But he was a gangster.
Right.
I think that him and Al,
I think so.
But I think they had beef outside of here.
Most likely.
So just like imagine.
Because Al Capone killed him. I would have beef with someone if they killed me.
Absolutely. So this is just an ongoing, maybe he trapped Al Capone's spirit there. He brought him back. He's like, you're with me forever in here.
I'm going to haunt you forever.
Yeah, forever. You left me here in this place and like you're coming back with me, man.
Yeah. So we talk about how horrible this place was. And of course it has to be haunted because of how horrible this place was. The When I say the prisoners were severely mistreated, that's kind of an understatement.
For sure.
Yeah.
There was so many things that we're about to get into and that we had looked into. Like we said earlier, like when it starts with isolation and then continues on.
Yeah, and I know there was limited interaction between the guards and the prisoners, but when you give the guards that much power over people, I mean, there's that famous experiment they did with those college students. Half of the college students were fake prisoners in this prison, half were fake prison guards in this prison. And the power and ego that just started developing with these fake prison guards. They're in an experiment. They know none of this is real, but the power and ego that just built within them over knowing they had control over these fake prisoners, like they did horrible things to them.
Yeah. Yeah. In an experiment that was meant to be, it was public, it was publicized. Yeah. They knew that this was not going to stay within the confines of where they were, and that this was part of a study. So to think that people can act like that when eyes are on them, imagine when they're not.
Right. And like, you're like, oh, I just work here. No one knows what's going on. People know what's going on. Like, even Charles Dickens was like, this place is not good. Like,
the vibes are bad, bro. I gotta get out of here.
Some of the things that they did was torture. And they, of course, they had them in their cells, but they would bring them out of their cells and, you know, in the middle of winter, dip them in an ice bath, and then chain them to an exterior wall until ice formed on their skin. Trigger warning. I should have said that before. But oh my God. Like, this horrible.
It took me an hour today to convince myself to shower because it was 54 degrees outside and I didn't want to be cold for any second of my day. So to imagine being
in an ice bath and then left in the cold,
like hanging from the wall, that's just dripping, like icicles dripping on, like that. No, thank you.
That's it. I can't imagine, like, and when when you get like so cold it burns.
Yeah, absolutely.
I can't imagine the burning feeling they're getting from ice forming on their skin.
Isn't that also like the part of it that is probably good news because then your nerves haven't died yet? Yeah. So the burning is the good part because when you don't feel it anymore, that tissue's not coming back.
Right.
I'm not a scientist, but I don't think you get to keep that.
There was also a chair known as the Mad Chair, and that never is good when you have a name for a chair.
It's when they were really angry at.
Yeah. They would sit prisoners in this chair and restrain them so tight that it cut off their circulation, like causing permanent damage and sometimes causing their limbs they'd have to amputate because that's how tight those straps were.
Which they did have a hospital right there in cell block 3. They converted that into a hospital. So you just, go straight from this one down the block.
Yeah, they knew what they were doing.
Absolutely. If you can say that about people who built a torture prison.
Yeah. And for the fact that this was open from 1829 to 1970. Now, the solitary penitentiary, the first ideal of that, kind of ended in 1913 because that is when it started to become overcrowded, where you had, instead of one person confined into solitary in a cell, you had 2 to 3 people in those same cells that were built for one person.
Yeah, that did not get any bigger just because there was new people in it.
Yeah. And so, like you said, it was supposed to house 250 people, and at one point it housed 1,700.
That is insane. Especially, okay, do you think they kept the silence thing at that point? How do you not talk to your roommates?
Yeah, I don't think there would be any way that you could keep the silence rule.
Literally on top of me right now. They had like iron beds and stuff too. Did we talk about that? Where they didn't even give them mattresses?
Oh my goodness.
Which that in itself, like outside of the torture devices that they literally made, for that reason. They also just didn't have real beds, other than Al Capone.
Yeah, Al Capone had anything that he wanted.
Yeah, 8 months there, and like I said, it's like a New York
The
apartment.
only bad thing that happened with Al Capone is that one of the murder victims haunted him.
Well, one of the murder victims that he caused that. So I don't know how bad I feel for him in that scenario. Did we talk about the first quote unquote first haunting? I don't know if it's documented.
I don't think so.
When the first experience was, but we talked about downstairs a little bit, which speaking of our personal experiences and us being upstairs, we did have that weird vibe the other day in here.
Yeah. We were up here just kind of exploring around in the building here, and we opened one door and we both said nope, and we shut the door. We were like, nope, absolutely not.
A mutual nope feeling. So we're recording from
the upstairs, just a few feet away from that room.
Yeah, just to really keep the spooky vibes going.
Yeah.
The first prison guard, the first murder that occurred in the penitentiary was of a prison guard. And he was supposedly also the first haunting. He was bludgeoned to death by a prisoner. Obviously, it wasn't another prison guard. Although who knows?
It could have happened.
Yeah, it probably did. There was over 1,000 deaths there.
Yeah, in the death ledger, they had a death ledger at this place. Over 1,000 people are logged into it. Most claim to have died because of tuberculosis, but that could just be the prison saying that.
I feel like they weren't going to lie about that because we did see that one that said iron gag. And if you're going to lie about one, that's the one you lie about.
We didn't talk about the iron gag. I don't know if
it freaks Sierra out.
I don't know if we can.
It's
it's too...
It's pretty rough.
It's too gruesome.
If you just hear for Wiggle 100.
Yeah, if you just hear the name iron gag, come to your own senses.
Yeah.
But we're not going into that.
But if they were going to lie about it, I feel like that's the one that they would have left off probably. But the hospital ward did have a separate section for all the people that did get tuberculosis. And they kind of confined them away from the rest of the people that were in the hospital wing.
So the prison did one good thing.
Yeah,
separating the sick.
Every once in a while, you like the therapy dog and stuff. Like there's a little glimmer of hope, and then it just goes awry.
Yeah.
There was actually the longest standing warden. He came into. I have this written down somewhere. He came into there at before they started building cell blocks 8 through 11. And he did have some ideas about how he was going to turn this place around and make it slightly less scary, probably because the state kept coming in and being like, you can't treat people like this.
Yeah.
So he did have some ideas on how he was going to expand on it and how he was going to stop the solitary confinement, and he was going to give them extra benefits and stuff. Like they ate well, things like that, you know, there's a little perk here and there. But then after he left, it definitely went straight back downhill.
Yeah, I mean, like we talked about, there was countless riots, so many escapes. Well, we watched that BuzzFeed Unsolved video. So all of my research and stuff I'll have into the description of the episode. But we watched the BuzzFeed Unsolved episode where they went to Eastern State Penitentiary. And the one set of people that tried to escape, they were unsuccessful. But they sat in the cell using spoons, a flattened can, anything they could find to dig a 31-inch hole in the wall, dig down 12 feet to try and get out of there.
Which, if you don't know the layout of the prison, which they did deliberately, I don't know where you think you're digging to.
Yeah.
So maybe...
And also, they brought up a good point in that video. How did you do this silently? Because you're cutting through concrete with a spoon.
Yeah, and cans, which I can't imagine is very quiet.
Yeah.
The cans on the concrete, which I don't like to think about that noise at all.
Oh, God, no.
But like we talked about, the prison guards really didn't involve themselves too much with the prisoners unless it was to punish them. So maybe just listening for footsteps down the hallway.
Yeah.
I mean, we keep talking about all the like the reverberating sounds and just the way that it was built. I'm sure it wasn't probably too hard to hear somebody come in.
Yeah.
But it also, in that sense, probably isn't too hard to hear somebody digging with an aluminum can through a wall either. So
Yeah. Do you have? We'll talk about the cells that they built
oh,
underground.
the Klondike cells. That part, so much of this horrifies me, but that was definitely a part that I got to. So, cell block 14, when they were building that, they wanted to stop paying, the prison wanted to stop paying outside architects and stuff to build the prison anymore. Probably to get away from
People
having
being
eyes
like,
on it.
"Hey, what's going on over there?"
Yeah, for sure. So cell block 14, they had a prisoner who had gone to Harvard. They asked him to do the architecture for that one in particular, and then they asked the prisoners to build it. And underneath of cell block 14, they found what they called the Klondike cells, which already you're in these small cells, you have very limited sunlight. The Klondike cells were all underground, and they would take the prisoners down there for weeks at a time.
Yeah,
and
like up to a month.
yeah, and night, no sunlight, you're underground. That was also where like the radiators and stuff would come into play, because it was the only way that they had to like interact with anybody. So if you're being rowdy down there, they would just pump up the heat, or they that central air that we talked about being a perk before is now used as a torture method, and you're literally underground. Like,
and the rooms were 4 feet by 8 feet
with only 8-foot ceilings.
Yeah.
Which, that 7-foot guy really hurt.
Yeah, it's just like how I don't understand how you could build something like that. And
the state did come in and see the Klondike cells, and they were like, this is not a thing that you're allowed to do.
Yeah.
And you need to shut these all down immediately. And the prison said, okay.
Sure, we'll do that.
Yeah, and I don't know if they ever really did.
It's hard
They told the state they did.
Yeah. You can tell the state whatever. It's hard because they're not going to come back every day to make sure you're not using that.
Well, and also, if you're just building stuff in this like maze penitentiary underground, who knows what they didn't discover while the people were still there, while it was still open. We know about this stuff now because we have the ability to go in and look at it. But who knows like what they missed on their visits. So they're telling them to shut this stuff down. Who knows what they missed? Who knows what they didn't see, if that's what they did see.
Yeah.
So
it's just Eastern State Penitentiary is horrible. And if you ever get a chance to go to Philly and you want to take a tour of this place, just to see, legitimately see how horrifying this place is. Like, we looked at the pictures and the videos and all that, and it's just looking at it, it looks so scary.
It definitely does not have good feelings. Just by, and that was the intention too, the imposing nature of it. When the architect originally was designing it, I think that he thought that it was going to be a good thing, and then
I think they thought they had a good idea,
that they had,
like we said, this was just an experiment.
It went on for way too long.
Yeah, it went on for over 100 years. How many years is that?
Oh my gosh, don't ask me to do math. That was not on my job application.
141 years.
Oh my goodness. So yeah, like and we're just kind of touching on the surface of what this place was really like. Like you said, like we got into a little bit of this spooky stuff that goes on there, but there does seem to be a lot of evidence of a lot of different activity that goes on there, which I imagine with over 1,000 deaths, and like we said, like just people leaving bits of themselves behind that were stripped away from them in this environment.
Like as that maintenance man said, he saw tortured souls, and that's all that's left there, because for 141 years, that's all they did to people.
Absolutely.
Was torture them.
Yeah. I don't I'm not well on my own for the most part. I start doing real weird stuff. And like I said, that's like in my own house with windows. So
Yeah.
I can't imagine. And then so later on, I mean, some of the prisoners were in there for murder and um other other harsher crimes. But just the idea of being in there for something so petty and so small as like,
Oh, talk about the pig thief.
oh my gosh, the
We
pig
brought it up
thief.
this a little bit earlier, but we'll go into detail here.
I honestly wish that I could remember this guy's name. We're just gonna call him Jimmy because they're all named Jimmy to me. I know. I think it's just because of Jimmy Clark from earlier. But the one escape attempt that was successful, he was in there for only like a few months. He was supposed to be in there for stealing a pig, and then he escaped. He successfully escaped, and then he immediately stole a pig, and they sent him back to Eastern State Penitentiary, where his story does not end because then he escaped for a second time. And you know what he did? He stole another pig. And they sent him back to Eastern Penitentiary.
So the idea that crime happens because of your environment and all that is not true.
Maybe he just really liked it in there.
Maybe because he only had a couple months and now you're in there forever because you can't stop stealing pigs. Also, what is that about?
I have just recently come off of a podcast about this guy that was like famous for like stealing pigs and cows and just basically torturing a town. I think it's more frequent than you would think. I mean, the Hatfields and the McCoys, they did a lot of that, I think.
Okay. Oh my god.
At one point in history, like when we didn't just exchange these paper bills for everything, I think that probably pigs were a lot more valuable.
Probably.
But now you just like go buy pieces of them at the store, so it's a little bit different. But that's like, you know, that back then would have been like going into somebody's house and like stealing like $500 or something, like you're stealing their pigs. So
probably their food source.
Yeah, their food source and their livelihood.
Yeah.
I'm not a history buff. I don't really know.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us for the first episode of Spooky History. Like I said, we want to do Pennsylvania history, of local history. We'll get more information on local stuff. I would love to do one of just like our encounters with the paranormal. Also, if anyone listening has encounters with the paranormal, we would love to hear your stories. I will put up an email for you to email your stories at the the end of this. But
yes, and anybody that has like places that they visited. I know that we talked about earlier that there's like a couple places that we're gonna visit that are pretty local. And then we have a trip planned next Friday, which
yes, I'm excited but also really nervous for that trip.
Yeah, I don't know which one of us is gonna be the one that's supposed to be like the rock there.
Yeah, the one that doesn't freak out.
It might just be two girls in the woods freaking out.
Screaming. Yeah.
It's like, sorry, ghosties. Like, so I know you're just trying to rest.
Two girls in the woods screaming next
It's literally
Friday.
just us.
It's just us. We're fine.
Or like
hopefully
your
we're fine.
Local pig stealer.
All right, so we'll get into a whole bunch of stuff. I would love to hear listeners' encounters with the paranormal. Check the description or the end of the video to see a email that you can email your stories to. And until next time.
Thanks for joining us.